Welcome back to the show, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, heroes and villains. I'm your host, Deshaun Fauntleroy. I know your time is precious, so we're going to get right into today's show. In today's show, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to discuss raising a champion athlete and a man in today's myopic world. We're going to be discussing the book Lens with the author and basketball coach from Indiana, Travis Daugherty. Coach Daugherty, tell us a little bit about your coaching background in Indiana and what you're up to these days.
Well, first of all, let me say thanks for having me. I love the work you guys are doing and really excited to be here with you today. I've been a high school basketball coach in Indiana for the last 14 years. I've been fortunate in that time to coach some good players and some good teams. And most importantly, had the opportunity as it relates to my life today to work with a number of sports parents, the parents of players that I've been able to coach and really learned a lot from that experience and have, tried to use my experiences in coaching not only to help prepare myself to do a better job in this important area of sports parenting, but now I've written this book, The Lens, in an attempt to continue to share that message. I think, sports provide us with such a unique opportunity to help build and develop so many important qualities our kids are going to need, not just to reach their full potential athletically, but more importantly, to really prepare them to have success in life beyond the game. And, really want to use this time, this experience in the life of my own kids. And hopefully this book will be a benefit to other people who are trying to do that important work too.
Yeah, I think it's important that, and Leland and I, we talk about this all the time, separating, the student from the athlete and letting them know that there is going to be a life after the game. The ball will stop bouncing one day. The crowd will go away. Leland, what's some of your thoughts on what Coach Daugherty is discussing with us so far?
No, I agree with Coach Daugherty, but I had a question for Coach Daugherty. Coach, can you give us your perspective? We know that you're a coach, but are you a parent also? Are you speaking from experience, or are you just speaking from sitting back and watching others? Give us your experience on that, please.
Sure. Yeah. I, as I mentioned, I was a high school boys basketball coach for 14 years. And in that time, I've had a chance to have kids of my own. I have 3 kids, an 11 and a 9-year-old boys and a 6-year-old girl. So, I think my experiences in coaching really showed me a lot and helped me learn and identify, in all the different experiences I had with parents. And honestly, probably arrogantly, I thought I really had a good grasp on who it is that I wanted to be. That is until I had kids of my own. I think once I had kids, I recognized for myself just how challenging this experience is. I think when you combine the desire we have to see our kids be successful, you combine that with just the competitive, emotional environment that sports provide. And on top of that, the incredible investment that so many of us make of our time and our energy and our money, really doing this responsibility, doing this job well is a huge challenge. And, writing the book was, I hope is going to be a benefit to others. Honestly, there was a very selfish motivation for me in writing, mainly because I know myself well enough to know that I needed a game plan in place. I wanted to have a clear outline of, the dad I wanted to be, the man I wanted to be in the life of my kids. And so I feel very fortunate in the writing experience to have gained some clarity and some insight for myself. And of course, I hope that clarity and insight can benefit others too.
Well, Coach, let me ask you this question. You say you have a daughter and 2 sons. Do you find it that there's a different approach in dealing with your daughter as opposed to dealing with your sons, or does your theories, is there a gray line? Explain that, kind of expound on that with me also, if you can.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I think there's been a definite difference for me so far. My boys are older. My daughter is just starting to get involved in some sports activities. But I'll tell you, I think from the beginning, my approach with my boys has always been a little bit different. I think as a father raising sons who I hope will emerge into successful men themselves, I've always looked at a lot of their experiences as opportunities to teach them, to equip them, and to toughen them up. Even challenging situations, I've always looked at as an opportunity for my boys to get tougher. I'm always on them, get tougher, get in there and battle and compete and develop that toughness. Honestly, you guys, with my daughter, man, I just want to protect her from every difficult thing in the world. It's like my boys can go out there and get tough and be tough, but I don't know what it is about having a girl, man. I think there's that natural protective element involved. So there's definitely a difference. I think as she gets older, developing her toughness is probably going to look a little different. And I'm certainly going to have to adjust the way, I parent her. But I think, we can all agree there are certain qualities that successful people have, regardless of whether they're male or female, regardless of even beyond, the game of sports itself, whether you're talking about success professionally, success as a spouse or a parent or a friend or an employee. There are so many of those critical qualities that our kids have to have developed. And those aren't things they're going to do as well as they're capable of on their own. They're going to need assistance from important people in their life. And I don't think there's anyone more important when it comes to doing that work than a parent.
I wanted to ask you, Coach, you have the myopic world of sports. And for our audience out there, and definitely our sports parents, explain what you mean by myopic as far as like your experience with student athletes and sports parents in the coaching world and what you see from parents.
Yeah, no doubt. The word myopic I think is a great word to describe not only our sports culture, but just the world we live in today overall. Myopic means short-sighted or narrow-minded. It means that we're not always thinking about what the results of our actions will be. And, we live in a culture that's driven by what's quick and what's easy and what's convenient. You might call that a microwave society, where what we want, we've been conditioned to expect that we can get right away. And a lot of times things that don't come quickly or easily or conveniently, we have a tendency to label as flawed or obsolete. If you look at, as an example, the internet connection we use today, almost anywhere we are now, we can hop on Wi-Fi, immediately be connected and moving, wherever we'd like online with no trouble. It wasn't that long ago that we were living in the world of the dial-up internet. You remember, I know you do. There's no way we would ever go back. Could you imagine going back even for one day to the dial-up internet? The Wi-Fi is quicker, it's easier, it's more convenient. That's what drives our world forward. And I think that's what we've been conditioned to expect in almost every area of life. And I would argue that myopic perspective has filtered its way into our youth sports culture in a number of ways. I think the importance we place on the outcome of our kids' sporting events, especially when it diminishes their development. There's so many things our kids need to learn and develop. And if the only thing we care about is winning, then we're probably overlooking opportunities we have to teach and train and equip our kids for some of the bigger, more important opportunities they have to win later. I would say, the value we've placed on the trophy is another example of our myopic perspective in sports, youth sports parenting. We love the trophy. I mean, if you scroll through Facebook on a weekend, you'll see, man, we love the trophy. And the trophy matters, of course. But, I ask people all the time to stop and consider, where are your childhood trophies today? Your childhood trophies today are probably in your parents' basement or in the trash, or maybe you don't even know where they are. And there's no way anyone would admit today that their childhood trophies are sitting on the mantle in their living room, where they stop, stare at them every night, think back on those memories from their childhood. That's not the way it works. At least no one would admit that that's how it works. And I think the same thing is true for our kids. The trophy matters, but it's really what the trophy represents that matters most. And as our kids grow up and get older, we're not gonna want them, putting their childhood trophies up on their living room mantle and living in the past. We want to continue to develop, the skills and abilities they need to have success moving forward. I think you could continue with, just the pressure that exists for today's sports parent to do more, to spend more, to have more. When you look at just the comparison and judgment that exists in the world of sports parenting, I think for me, there's a big difference between judgment and development. Judgment is you saying, my kid just doesn't have it. Where development to me is saying, my kid just doesn't have it yet. And when we have a myopic perspective, it's so easy for us to look at just what's right in front of us. So many of the decisions we make and the choices we make, we don't always see clearly what the results of our actions will be. And as a sports parent, if you don't have a proper perspective, man, I think it's almost impossible for you to really help your child become their very best. You talk about the myopic perspective of today's youth sports parent, characterized by blaming, complaining, trying to protect their child from anything that they feel like is unfair, that's they're undeserving, or that they're not entitled to. I think that's one of the great challenges we face in this world, where that's what people do. It takes a very intentional response to handle a challenging situation, no matter what it is, the right way, and to know that your response is so important in helping your child develop a response of their own.
Speaking of challenging situations and looking at them from an objective of the truth, and, oftentimes, Coach, you've seen this, Leland, you've seen this, parents, they can make mistakes. And I know, Leland, you have a unique approach to training. You found that it works from a disciplinarian standpoint, from a technical standpoint, in keeping kids at the fundamentals until it's time to progress. I've seen you, Leland, have a sports parent remove their kid from your program only to go find 4 or 5 other people and realize that the training is off, the conversation isn't there, the mentorship isn't there, the leadership component isn't there, and they'll come back and finally they'll confess and say, you know what, we made a mistake. This is the right place for little Johnny to be. I mean, you actually have a little Johnny in your program. But Coach Daugherty, let's talk about some of the mistakes, or the biggest mistakes, that sports parents can make with their student athlete.
Sure. Well, we talked already about the power of our perspective. And I think when we're intentional about making sure we recognize what the results of our choices will be in the lives of our kids, certainly because all of us want success for our kids, that need to protect, to support, maybe even just to make our kids feel good, sometimes distorts the reality of where our choices lead. And to me, that one mistake, that choosing a myopic perspective, if you can only see what's right in front of you, you can't see clearly what the results of your actions are. You're gonna help lead your child to a destination you'd rather they not end up. I think, if we could clearly identify the path from wherever we are today to where exactly it is we want our kids to go, when we create a vision, it clarifies the choices that we've got to make to get them from here, wherever they are, to that destination. And again, that requires a long-term perspective. These skills and abilities that we talk about, understanding how to give your best effort, understanding how to overcome adversity, a desire to get better, to get coached, the ability to be a teammate, taking risks, having a positive attitude. None of those qualities can we give our kids as a one-time gift. You're not going to be able to wrap up toughness and give it to your child at Christmas. And your child's going to be able to open it up and you say, son, I know you're getting older. You're going to need this. So here you go. You have it. Toughness can only be built through a long, slow, sometimes painful process. And in order to recognize the reality of that process and to see the merit in the small, steady growth it takes to get our kids from where they are to where we want them to go, that perspective is critical. And so that's the one encouragement that I try to remind myself of and really try to offer to other parents is see the big picture, create a clear vision for who you want your kids to become, and then make sure the choices that you're making today are helping them move just one small step closer towards the destination. If you can't see where they're headed, it's entirely possible they may be going somewhere else.
I really feel like, Coach, I agree with you. And I also feel that, there's a societal battle that you're up against at all times. Let's take it back to the trophy situation. When we were young, those trophies were given out few and far between. And somewhere along the way, we had a group of parents that felt like, it's not right to give Johnny a trophy and you're not going to give little Paul a trophy because then Paul doesn't feel special. And I ran into this situation when I was coaching the youth football team around 3rd and 4th grade. And I felt like there were a few individuals, even though the trophies were basically identical, what I did was I put a different label on the trophies. And there were a few individuals who, as a core, they drove the group. The group followed that core group. And, generally that's the way I tend to coach. I find the guys that buy in and I concentrate on them, and then everybody else tends to come along. Well, these trophies had a special, MVP or whatever I put on the trophy. And I actually got a parent who complained. She was like, well, why you want to make them feel like they're more special than my child? And I wanted so bad to say, you know what, in the real world, you might as well let them, experience this now, because in the real world, that's the same thing that's going to hit him right in his face. And the longer you let it take.
Yeah, I think communication with the parents is critical. I think as coaches, we're always trying to educate our kids, our students, our players. But the reality is, our kids don't understand in many respects what it takes to be great. And if you look at in the world of sports, in other professions, those who are the best at what they do have all embraced that process. And it's important for our kids to develop that understanding, but that's not something they're going to get overnight. They're going to have to struggle their way into that understanding. The hope, of course, is that parents have a clearer perspective, that they've recognized in their own life, in the areas where they're strong, what that process has looked like. And I think as a coach, if you can get your parents, the parents of your players, to trust that process, then you also allow them to step into that journey with you and with their child. That things aren't always going to be easy, that failure, struggle, challenge, hardship are all a part of anyone's success story. And if you can help parents connect to that in their own life, I think it makes it a little easier for them to accept that reality in the life of their kids. And when you've got parents on board, creating that culture amongst your team, amongst the kids, becomes much easier. So I think that parent communication piece is critical.
I was going to say, man, that I have some kids there this fall. They're going to be juniors. And I started with these kids, training them in the middle of their 7th grade year. Progressions, regressions of powerlifting, Olympic lifting, jump training, sprint training, mobility, you name it. Where I train my athletes at, Coach Daugherty, is as the storefront is a physical therapy clinic. And on the backside is 5,000 square feet of turf and rubber flooring, all the training tools you can imagine. So these two athletes that I'm talking about in this particular situation, when I first got them, they were pretty much spastics, clumsy, all over the place, immature. But one thing I noticed about them is that they would come to training, 3 times a week. They were always consistent with that. And I could see the long haul, I could see further down the road. I'm like, if they keep this up, they're going to make great athletes. And both of these kids, one football wrestler, the other kid was a football and basketball athlete. Well, the kid that's the football player and the wrestler, he's in a situation now where he is starting to hit the radar as far as press clippings and projection as a 2020 athlete. Now, the other kid that played basketball, and because I know Leland being a basketball skills trainer, strength coach also, when I noticed this kid was playing basketball, I referred him to Leland. And to this date, that particular kid has transferred schools, quit basketball last year, is playing football at a different school right now, and is borderline quitting. And it's like, I was talking to Leland one day. I'm like, well, what makes one kid succeed and the other fail or stop? And they both started at the same level. And one, we've talked about a parent allowing a child to quit or allowing a child to make these decisions. Would you care to speak on that? And Leland, you can jump in on that too with Coach Daugherty.
Yeah, I think, when it comes to the toughness that's required to be great at anything, and maybe there's no more important area when it comes to success than here in what we're talking about in sports. If you want to be a great athlete, there's a certain level of toughness that's required. And understanding, again, the process required to develop that toughness. For me, it's a lot. I think a great analogy and illustration is taking the gloves off for our kids. Like when we use gloves when we work on the car, the lawnmower, in the yard. We do it to protect our skin from the friction, from the hard work that we know can damage or blister us. And I don't know how many people you've met before, but certainly there have probably been people you've shaken hands with whose hands are just tough, rough, like sandpaper. Develop that callous skin in the important areas where they need that toughness. And for our kids, the reality is, if we want our kids to develop that toughness, then we've got to take the gloves off our kids, and we've got to allow them to experience the struggle, the friction, the hardship. And it's tough because early in the process, just like when you take the gloves off and work in the garden, man, your hands are exposed. They're blistered. They hurt. It's painful. But it's all part of the process. When you're done with that experience, your hands heal. They learn how to take care of themselves. They get tougher in the important areas where they need it. And then the next time you do that work, it may still be tough, but you're more prepared. And the more of that difficult work that you do, the more challenge or difficulty, your kids experience, the more callous they become in the important areas where they need that toughness. Now, we don't need toughness in every single area of life. Just like with our hands, there are places where, having more sensitivity is a good thing in life. But I think we can all agree that if we want our kids to be the best they can be, there are some areas where they've got to develop some toughness. So I don't think it's imperative for kids to endure every challenge or every hardship that exists in the world. But at the same time, I would ask a parent, if your child is never experiencing any challenge or any hardship, if they're never developing that toughness in the areas where they really need it, then man, it's going to be tough for them to be their best. And that's something kids don't always understand, but as adults, we've got to be able to recognize that reality and allow our kids, our players, the kids we're training, or whoever it is, to struggle their way through it in order to develop that critically important skill.
Today's episode is brought to you by Bay Area company Millennium Edge Apparel, an athletic apparel company that manufactures clothing for basketball, golf, soccer, regular workouts, and even restaurant staff members. To learn more, visit millenniumedgeapparel.com. And now, back to the show.
What is your method, and how do you get parents and kids to trust the process? Because basically, we've heard that cliche, trust the process. That's what you're saying right now. What is your style? What do you do to try to get the parent and the child to trust the process? Do you approach the kid first to try to have him go back to the parent, or do you just cut straight to the chase and say, look, hey, Johnny, bring your mom and your dad over here so we can have a little conversation? Give us a little insight on what you do to get them to trust your process.
No doubt about it. And I think, in writing the book, one quote that I just constantly came back to that speaks, Leland, so directly to what you just said is Frederick Douglass's quote: "It's better to build strong children than repair broken men." And, when you look at the challenge we face as parents, man, building strong children is hard work. It's tough work. It's inconvenient. But when you look at the alternative, that, so many kids spend their adult life trying to recover from their childhood. None of us want that for our kids. And I think when we look at it in that context, some of the difficult decisions we're required to make today become easier to make because it clarifies for us, again, in the long term, when we see the big picture, where overprotection, over support, a focus on just making our kids feel good, on where that leads, that leads them down a very unhealthy, unrealistic, and unproductive path.
Coach Daugherty, usually when we get athletes, they're coming to improve their game somewhere. It could be running faster, it could be jumping higher, it could be some type of a skill, whether if it's football, catching, basketball, it could be shooting or some type of skill development, or it could be some aspect of their psychological game. Maybe they do really well in practices or against lower level teams, but when it comes time for intense competition, the results, they just don't show. How would you explain to the sports parent how they can help their student athlete improve their game from your perspective in relationship to your book?
Well, I don't think any of us would argue that our kids' physical, sport-specific ability is so important to their success as an athlete. Whether we're talking about their ability to run and jump, how strong they are, or, as you said, how well they can dribble with their weak hand, kick a ball, make a tackle. All those things are so important. What the book really focuses on is what I've called our children's hidden talent, the mental skills and abilities that really separate the champion in sports and in life from everyone else. And those talents are simply love for the game, understanding how to give his best, overcoming adversity, seeking improvement, getting coached, being a teammate, taking risks, and having a positive attitude. None of those things are necessarily directly connected to an individual sport, but certainly in every one of those areas, building and developing our kids there impacts who they become as an athlete. So I think for a parent, understanding that if you're not a basketball or a football or a volleyball expert, that's fine. You still have a great responsibility and a great opportunity to impact the athlete your child becomes by focusing on developing their hidden talent. Because in any of those areas, if you compare an athlete who's developed in those areas to that same athlete who hasn't, let's say an athlete who knows how to give his best compared to an athlete who doesn't, an athlete who knows how to overcome adversity compared to that same athlete who doesn't, there's no doubt that developing that hidden talent moves an athlete closer to their full potential. The real benefit, though, I think for a parent is seeing clearly that not only does that separate your child on the athletic field, but man, that really helps your child become a champion in life. You're preparing them to become their very best, even when sports are done. And who knows, for any of us, when that day's coming for our kids. I do know it's probably coming quicker than any of us realize, and probably sooner than any of us want. But when you look at in all those hidden talent areas, there's a direct correlation, not just to success athletically, but again, success as a professional, success in your marriage, in parenting, in friendship. People who have developed in those areas are unique. They're set apart. They're uncommon, not just on the playing field, but beyond the playing field as well.
I agree with you 100%, Coach. I also think that what we have going on in society is we have parents that they just don't want to see their children in an uncomfortable situation. Just like Coach says, the body, its normal mechanism of when there's wear and tear on a certain part of your body, its normal defense mechanism is to build callus. And you just have a influx of parents who don't want to see their children or don't want to put their children through any psychological or physical difficulties. And I like to say this: either it's you're going to take them through it, or something else will take them through it. And I kind of look at corporal punishment in that way. And I know it's not right to whoop your kid or anything like that, but I look at it in this sense. I'd rather give my son a spanking today than see some handcuffs and a billy club upside his head tomorrow. And I'd rather be the one to implement that punishment. I'd rather be me than a system that has no understanding, don't know who he is, and any caring of who he is as a person. So as a parent, that's your choice. I don't know how you're going to try to, how you develop that. I know I used it. I think I had to whoop my son maybe 2 times in lifetime. He remembers both those times, and we sit back and we laugh about it to this very day.
I'd say of all the one-liners I love to use, especially in my own life, I always come back to this simple phrase that champions breed champions. That if we want our kids to be their best, if we want our kids to overcome adversity, if we want our kids to be selfless, hardworking, champion people, if we want our kids to be their best, then we got to be our best, because champions breed champions. If I act like an idiot, which I have every right to do, if I want to blame the coach or hate on the teammates or play the victim, I'm completely entitled to that choice. But idiots breed idiots. Victims breed victims. Just like champions breed champions. And I would argue in the situation with your son, Leland, that hopefully he would have made a great decision about his response to that challenge on his own. But I think you really empowered him to act and think and respond like a champion because you were intentional about your response. And I think That's where so many parents fall short. When we don't think clearly about our response, then even sometimes unintentionally, we give our kids permission to accept less than the best from themselves too.
Coach Daugherty, I was going to say, you know, reflecting back on Leland's situation, whether it's be it in college, you could bring this back to a high school situation or even a youth or middle school situation. What would you say to the sports parent out there that would have blamed, complained, and defended, you know, their student athletes' interaction as to why they were in that position, and maybe would have let them quit, or maybe would have been the first to run and talk to the coach after the game or the next day? What would you say to that sports parent when they encounter situations like this that Leland is expressing to us, especially the ones who might let the son or daughter or the son quit the team or things go south?
Sure. Well, I guess I would say you need to clarify what it is that you want the outcome of this situation to be. You know, if, you know, in my mind, raising and developing a champion means two things. It means, number one, helping your child reach their full potential as an athlete. And number two, preparing your child for real, authentic success beyond the game. So let's look at this particular challenging situation. What are the choices you have? If your desire is to raise a champion, then that means you want to help your boy reach his full potential as an athlete. That means more playing time, a greater opportunity, a better experience. So based on this event, what can lead to that outcome? Certainly blaming and complaining and defending might make you feel better. If your kid quits or shuts down or pouts his way through the rest of the season, then there's no way he's going to get what it is you said you want, which is an opportunity for him to be his best. You know, if you choose to respond differently, if you say, okay, son, we aren't in the spot we want, just as Leland did, what are your options? You go back and work as hard as you can every single day. You know, you show coach that despite this challenge, you can fight through it and overcome this adversity. You show him that despite this challenge, you know what it means to be a great teammate. You can support other people who maybe even right now are getting something that you really want. You know, doing those things provides you with the best opportunity to get what you want for your son, which is to prove to coach that he belongs on the floor and help coach see that he needs a bigger opportunity. You know, at the same time, if you're also concerned with preparing your child for real, authentic success in life, what a great opportunity. You know, like, are things always fair? Absolutely not. You know, do we always get everything we think we deserve or are entitled to in life? No one would say that. You know, all of us have faced situations like that in life. And this is a great opportunity, I would argue, to help a child learn maybe even just this one small instance, that reality about life, that things are going to be difficult. You know what's more important than what's difficult is your response to what's difficult. You know, when you help your kid understand that, when they come to that understanding, then you've helped your child move closer to becoming his best, not just his best as an athlete, but important understanding that's going to impact who he is for life. Is that always easy to do, especially in an emotional moment where you want success for your kid and you feel like things aren't fair? Absolutely not. And I think that's why, if as a sports parent, if you only rely on the emotion of the moment, if you don't have the big picture in mind and you're just showing up and doing your best in the moment, you're likely going to make decisions you regret. But if you see the big picture, you've clarified what it is that you really want for your child, then it more likely gives you an opportunity to do what Leland did, to step back, clarify, here's what I want, here's the best choice I can make to help my son get what I want for him and what I believe he wants for himself. And then, man, let's get to work fighting that fight and doing the dirty work it takes to be great. You know, it's not easy to be great. And that's the reason why most people don't do it.
I got a phrase that I use. I call it point the finger inward, and I've always raised my son on that concept. And one day, when he was at the University of Portland, he played for Coach Revino, who's a great coach, and we were blessed to do an interview with him. Deshaun did an interview with him earlier in the year, but there were some things going on with my son where against OIT he had a great game, had like 17 points as a freshman, and he was coming home and he was getting ready to play the rivalry game against Portland State, and the outcome was he got to play 4 minutes. And after the game, nothing hurts you worse as a parent to see your child in tears because he's worked hard, he's given his all, and he's kind of exhibited this to everyone on the team. Everyone sees him as a hard working individual, but he felt like he didn't get what he deserved. And as a parent, I could have attacked that situation in several different ways. Normally, what parents do is they come to the child's defense. Oh, well, what happened and why did he? Well, tell me what went and tell just. But before I did that, what I did was I processed the emotions that he was going through that night. I sat back and I gave myself to process. Gave myself time to process that. And also what I did was I kind of went outside myself and viewed it from the coach's standpoint. Being a coach, you have to do that, So I started to look at what Rev was going through. And at that particular time, you had the administration talking about bringing a new guy in, and this new guy happened to be, big in the community, ex-pro player in on the city's team. So yeah, he's dealing with all this, and he has a family, and as a coach, you're thinking about all that, but everybody else ain't. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I did. Is I thought more about that, and then when me and Jazz had our conversation, it was more about him pointing the finger inward and me telling him, basically, I said, buddy, are they still paying for your education? He said, yes. I said, do you still got those practice dummies out there? Meaning the players. Do you still got, because they just built a new facility. They built $1 million facility. Is that still there? Yes. And I hit him with this one. The coach can only determine how much time did you play on his team. He can never determine what kind of player you're going to become. You're going to determine that by not putting in the work. Or you're going to determine that by putting in the work, showing him what you're about. And then what he does is he drops his guards and say, okay, well, I give up. And eventually that's what happened, Coach. He dropped his guards and was like, hey, this kid works hard. And Jazz ended up he had a very impressive freshman season, and me and him often talk about that situation, and hopefully, if the situation comes with Coach Musselman, he'll use the same approach.
Sure, and that level of respect, I'm sure that he gained through your son's experience, through that challenge. As a coach, you see so many kids and parents who do it wrong. And when you see somebody, of course, even as a coach, they get difficult decisions to make, and it's hard as a coach to make decisions that is gonna put a kid you care about in a tough spot. I guarantee you that Coach Rev didn't enjoy that difficult decision he had to make, and yet, for whatever reason, that was what he felt like was the right thing to do. I guarantee you that as a coach, he respected you and your son. And again, as part of the process of him becoming a better player and a better man and more prepared to have greater success moving forward. Now look at the opportunities that are presented to him. It's not an accident that he responded like a champion, and then he was rewarded for that response. That's just, it's tough to trust that process. But that to me is a great illustration of the reality of the process. You trust the process, and then the outcome sort of takes care of itself. Information about the book can be found at thelensbook.com. Ordering information is there. The book can be found on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. A simple Google search would probably help you track it down. The book is also on social media. I'm pretty active through the book on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. On Twitter at _lens_book. The same address on Instagram, and then a simple Facebook search for The Lens Book will probably lead you there. That's really created just as a regular word of challenge and encouragement for sports parents who are trying to do this important work in the life of their child. You can follow me on Twitter at Coach T Daugherty, CoachTDaugherty. And would love to connect with your listeners. My goal, of course, is to do the very best job that I can in this important work in my life, and I hope that in doing so, I can help encourage and challenge other people who are doing the same.
The Sports Mastery Workbook was created for the student athlete and the parent to work through together. The Sports Mastery Workbook was created for the student athlete and the coach to work through together. It was created in a sense and in a way to bridge the gap in communication between these parties and build a successful relationship dynamic. To learn more, visit sportsmastery.com/workbook or check out the show notes page and click on the link.